To help unpack a different story, but very important, is Matt Gaetz. Matt, welcome back to the program.
Thanks so much, Charlie. And I know we have important work to talk about, but regarding the military vaccine issue, tomorrow, the National Defense Authorization Act will be marked up in the House Armed Services Committee. I will introduce an amendment to end the vaccine mandate, to reinstate everyone who has been driven out of the military with their rank and back pay. And what your emailer is correct about is that it won't just be Democrats opposing me. When I offered this amendment previously, it was the leading Republican on the House Armed Services Committee, Mike Rogers, who opposed my amendment and who said that it should be the Republican position that we have a 100% vaccination rate in the military. That is something that I strongly oppose, and I don't think that should be the view of the leading Republican on armed services.
Yeah, I mean, it's just shocking. And I mean, they look at data. I mean, they look at what's actually happening. It's incredible. So I want to get to the story here. Is it true that Joe Biden's IRS spent approximately $700,000 on ammunition the last couple months? How is this even possible?
Just in 2022 alone, the IRS bought $725,000 worth of ammunition. And so they've got about 2,000 agents who engage in law enforcement. I sort of think about the IRS as people in windowless cubicles with green eye shades, not people, busting doors down and unloading ammunition. But nonetheless, even if that were the case, you're looking at over 1,200 rounds of 9mm ammunition for every single agent that the IRS has. And I think it is mission creep. And what's interesting is that while the Biden administration is doing everything they can to stop law-abiding Americans from getting firearms and ammunition, they are, on the other hand, soaking up the supply that exists in the marketplace and using it for the government, not for the citizenry.
Is it possible other departments are doing the same thing that we don't know about?
There are very curious purchases of ammunition across the enterprise of government. Perhaps the oddest one I found, the Railroad Retirement Board spent thousands and thousands of dollars on 9mm ammunition. And so it is true that every single agency seems to want their own army and that they want to be armed well.
It's very suspicious at the very least. So give us some more insight into kind of what's happening in D.C. It's very interesting. So we have the IRS buying $700,000 worth of ammunition. We're sending $40 billion to Zelensky, which no one has given me a good excuse why we're doing that. And then Republicans are negotiating gun control. So let me get this straight. Guns for Zelensky, ammunition for the IRS, but we want to try to make it harder for you, the citizen, to get a gun. Help me unpack that.
Well, you know that the nodes of power in Washington, D.C. always want to grow, like a cancerous tumor. And all they want is anything they have and anything that borders it. And as these agencies have more and more mission creep, they literally mission creep into law enforcement. And I think you're right. The Republican Party has not done enough to stand up against Joe Biden's effort to try to arm, battalions oceans away while at the same time disarming American citizens. Republican senators have been totally willing to go along with Joe Biden in both endeavors. And right now, the greatest threat to your Second Amendment rights, Republicans in the United States Senate cutting deals on red flag laws to bribe states to enact them. It was crazy to me that I heard Senator Cornyn respond recently that, well, we're not for a federal red flag law. We're just going to make it easier for states to enact red flag laws. The reality there is that they want to see high utilization of the apparatus of government taking people's guns away without due process, without an opportunity to be heard in some cases. It is not an appropriate use of the federal tax dollar to buy ammunition for the IRS or, in this case, to be engaging in the other tomfoolery that we see from Republican senators willing to bribe states for red flag laws.
It's just extraordinary. So there's so many other issues happening in the country that are not being addressed in Washington, D.C. We just spent a whole hour talking about what's happening in our military. You represent a very military-heavy district. Can you talk about, for example, U.S. Army teaching critical race theory to West Point cadets? U.S. Navy orders this one, how Navy is training sailors on proper gender pronouns. U.S. Air Force Base Community Center hosts Drag Time Story Hour after initially being canceled by the military. What is driving this, Matt? I mean, and this is not a slight at the enlisted, at the wonderful heroes that serve in our military, but what about the officers? What about the people at the top levels of our military? Where is this coming from?
Well, the patriotism still burns very bright among those who are signing up to serve our country in a variety of facets in the military. But, I mean, does it feel sometimes, Charlie, like our military is being run by men in dresses at the Pentagon? I mean, every time I have a question the opportunity to question Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, Mark Milley, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, they are just full-throated in their embrace of wokeism. Now you have a circumstance, Charlie, where service members can actually defy orders to go to a state like Florida or Texas or Mississippi because those states don't have the right abortion laws, or maybe the Don't Say Gay bill would allow someone to refuse orders. So this isn't just using the military for social justice goals. It is actually an erosion of our readiness because we aren't focused on the lasers and munitions and hypersonics and drones and swarming capabilities where in some cases we are being outpaced by China. Instead, they're focused on pronouns, socialism. I mean, at the National War College, there was actually a lesson taught by a visiting professor about the values of democratic socialism. You know, they realized that the DOD was one of the last areas of Washington, D.C. that had not been just totally sucked up by the radical left. You know, they'd already controlled the Department of Labor, the EPA, the Department of Education, and like the DOD was the last one. And now you see how focused and persistent the effort is from the Biden administration to ruin our military.
But we only have a minute remaining, but help me understand this. So you have these neoliberal, neoconservative Republicans that want to invade every sovereign country in the world, like Lindsey Graham. How will Lindsey Graham have the fighting force to go do his war games if the military is too busy talking about pronouns? That just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Where are the neocons here? It's the one thing that we actually might be able to agree on with them.
Yeah, I would welcome that agreement. I want a military that is strong, focused, appreciated, and rarely used, and in fact only used for the interests of our country, not foreign interests abroad, not special interests here at home. And you're right, the neoconservatives won't be able to play their war games if we convert the military into drag queen story time instead of the most lethal fighting force.
What's so incredible about this is that the drags time happened at a military base in Germany, what's happening, which is just hundreds of miles away from what we're told is new Hitler invading Ukraine. So it's like, wait a second, if you really believed he was Hitler, why are you allowing drag time story hour at your military bases? That doesn't make, maybe you actually don't believe he's the threat you say he is.
No, I don't want a military that's just forever in low-yield conflict and in this sort of low-yield social justice apparatus. I revere our military.
Yes,
I love our
do too.
I know you do as well.
But the Milley and Austin, not so much. I think we have you for one more. So, Matt, just stay right there. Matt Gaetz from Florida. He also has a great podcast you should check out. Email us your thoughts, freedom@charliekirk.com. So, Matt, we got an email from a listener, and they said, all the politicians in D.C. are terrible, but I like Matt Gaetz. So that should be a great compliment.
Well, maybe that means I'm a statesman, not a politician in D.C.
Yeah, I mean, I'm telling you, people say, Charlie, are you going to run for office? I said, not at gunpoint. I wouldn't want to be a politician. This just sounds terrible and awful. I like what we're doing.
Like you having your hands on your weapons where you are, being able to get folks enthusiastic about
That's right, and get to host radio and do all these wonderful things. So, Matt, I want to kind of keep building this out, though. Before I ask you about you potentially nominating Trump for Speaker of the House, which I find to be hilarious, I want to ask you about prioritization. Why is it the Republican Party, help our viewers and listeners understand, why do they, with an urgent pace, sprint to the House floor, cancel their vacations, postpone their fundraisers to go send Zelensky $40 billion? While our border remains wide open, we're living through an opioid epidemic, suicide is on the increase. Explain to me the calculus, the drama, what goes on in the inner hallway discussions where it's actually $56 billion total. Help me understand this, because I feel like I live in a different planet.
We have an element of the Republican Party in Washington that seeks to return to the neoconservative mean. And remember, Charlie, the Biden administration only requested $15 billion for our own border. During the Trump administration, we had to beg and plead with Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell to get, $1.7 billion for our border wall with Mexico. And yet, with really no question, we send, you're right, the number's closer to $56 billion over to a conflict in Europe where the direct connection to American life is tenuous at best. And I think it's because a lot of Republicans believe that America's role in the world is to be the global piggy bank, to be the global policeman. And oftentimes, there are a lot of contractors and a lot of global actors that get this money. I mean, right now, there's not a whole lot of incentive for the Ukrainian elites to conclude these hostilities, because as long as the hostilities are ongoing, the cash spigot remains on. And a lot of these folks have offshore accounts. There are sales of U.S. military equipment right now happening on the dark web. And we're being played as fools. Totally. And it's not as if we don't know that. It's that we're willing participants in the grift, because a lot of people in Congress have a lot of friends who do well on that personally and financially in securing their own power bases, even as we see the American people continue to get crushed by irresponsible decisions in Washington.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not shocked. I'm not shocked that they want to send money to Ukraine. I mean, they want to send money everywhere. But the thing that shocks me is the amount and the urgency. It's as if every other domestic problem has been solved. Let me be clear. I don't believe in any of the money should be sent there. I've said that for a while. But it's just, it wouldn't surprise me. They said, okay, let's do 500 million. Like, okay, whatever, sure. I wouldn't make that big of a thing. But $56 billion, Matt, while people in your district, they can't afford gas or groceries. And so I just found the whole thing to be so extraordinary. Okay, minute and a half remaining. You have said that you are going to nominate Donald Trump for Speaker of the House if we take back the House in November, which I believe we will. Tell us your case.
Donald Trump has a unique ability to be able to marshal conservatives toward an agenda and outcomes. Too often, congressional leadership is solely determined by who can raise the most money and redistribute the most money from political action committees and lobbyists. And that means that many of our leaders have already sold shares of themselves to large corporations, woke corporations, and a lot of interests that aren't American interests. And so I think that Donald Trump has the vision and the energy to do it. What I have to confess to you, Charlie, is the rod tip has not exactly bent with his interest on the subject. I've tried to sell, you only have to be speaker for like an hour. Just take the gavel from Nancy Pelosi, look at that look on her face, give a great speech, and then we can elect Jim Jordan to be speaker or something. but I've tried to convince him on a short tenured speakership, but in every conversation, it seems he has his eyes on a different job in our federal government.
I think he would be the first person to be president and speaker. I know that John Quincy Adams was president and member of Congress. I don't think he became Speaker of the House. He definitely wasn't, because he was in the minority advocating for abolitionist slavery. Good luck becoming Speaker in the 1820s with that view. So he'd be the first ever, I believe, to be both the Speaker of the House, and he would be a non-member Speaker, which would be hilarious. Matt Gaetz. Matt Gaetz represents a beautiful part of Florida. Thank you so much for joining us, Matt. We deeply appreciate it.
Thank you, and we're honored to have you as a Florida man now too, Charlie.
There we go. Arizona now. Long story. Tell you later.